Organs Without Bodies. Deleuze and Consequences. By Slavoj Zizek. Netocracy. The pro-capitalist aspect of Deleuze and Guattari was fully developed by Alexander Bard and Jan Soderquist in their Netocracy, a supreme example of what one is tempted to call not cybercommunism, cyber-Stalinism. While cruelly dismissing Marxism as outdated, as part of the old industrial society, it takes from Stalinist Marxism a whole series of key features, from primitive economic determinism and linear historical evolutionism, the development of the forces of production. The shift of accent from industry to management of information necessitates new social relations, the replacement of the class antagonism of capitalist and proletariat with the new class antagonism of netocrats and consumptariat. To the extremely rude notion of ideology, in the best naive enlightened way, ideology, from traditional religion to bourgeois humanism, is repeatedly dismissed as the instrument of the ruling classes and their paid intellectuals, destined to keep in check the lower classes. Here, then, is the basic vision of netocracy as a new mode of production. The term is inadequate because, in it, production precisely loses its key role. Whereas in feudalism the key to social power was the ownership of land, legitimized by religious ideology, and in capitalism the key to power is the ownership of capital, with money as the measure of social status, with private property as the fundamental legal category and the market as the dominant field of social exchange, all of this legitimized by the humanist ideology of man as an autonomous free agent. In the newly emerging netocracy the measure of power and social status is the access to key pieces of information. Money and material possessions are relegated to a secondary role. The dominated class is no longer the working class but the class of consumerists, consumptariat, those condemned to consume the information prepared and manipulated by the netocratic elite. This shift in power generates an entirely new social logic and ideology. Since information circulates and changes all the time, there is no longer a stable, long-term hierarchy but a permanently changing network of power relations. Individuals are nomadic, individuals, constantly reinventing themselves, adopting different roles. Society itself is no longer a hierarchic whole but a complex, open network of networks. Netocracy presents the local groups of the new informational elite almost as islands of non-alienated, utopian communities. It describes the life of the new symbolic class, for which lifestyle, access to exclusive information, and social circles matter more than money. Top academics, journalists, designers, programmers, etc. do indeed live this way. The first problem here is that of recognition. Do netocrats really not care about others, or is their ignorance feigned, a way to assert their elitism in the eyes of others? Obviously, they do not care for money, because they have enough of it. Plus, to what extent and in what more precise sense are they in power, independently of their wealth? Are the authors of Netocracy fully aware of the ultimate irony of their notion of nomadic subjects and thought as opposed to traditional, hierarchic thought? What they are actually claiming is that the netocrats, today's elite, realize the dream of yesterday's marginal philosophers and outcast artists, from Spinoza to Nietzsche and Deleuze. In short, and stated even more pointedly, the thought of Foucault, Deleuze, and Guattari, the ultimate philosophers of resistance, of marginal positions crushed by the hegemonic power network, is effectively the ideology of the newly emerging ruling class. The problem of netocracy is that it moves simultaneously too fast and not fast enough. As such, it shares the mistake of all those other attempts that much too quickly elevated a new entity into the successor of capitalism and other candidates, the post-industrial society, the informational society. Against such temptations, one should insist that the informational society is simply not a concept at the same level as feudalism or capitalism. The picture of the accomplished rule of the netocracy is therefore, in spite of the author's stress on new class antagonisms, a utopia, an inconsistent composite that cannot survive and reproduce itself on its own terms. All too many of the features of the new netocratic class are sustainable only within a capitalist regime. Therein resides the weakness of netocracy, Following the elementary logic of ideological mystification, it dismisses as remainders of the capitalist and statist past what are, effectively, positive conditions of the functioning of the informational society. The key problem is that of capitalism, the way netocracy relates to capitalism. On one side, we have patents, copyrights, and so forth, all the different modalities in which information itself is offered and sold on the market as intellectual property, as another commodity. And when the authors claim that the true elite of netocracy is beyond patents, and so forth, because its privilege is no longer based on possessing the information but on being able to discern, in the confusingly massive quantity of information, the relevant material, they strangely miss the point. Why should this ability to discern what really matters, the ability to discard the irrelevant ballast, not be another perhaps crucial information to be sold? In other words, they seem to forget the basic lesson of today's cognitive sciences, namely that, already, at the most elementary level of consciousness, information is the ability to abstract, to discern the relevant aspects in the confusing multitude with which we are constantly bombarded. On the other side, there is the prospect of the exchange of information beyond the property relations characterizing capitalism. This inner antagonism is realized in the basic tension within the new netocratic class between pro-capitalists, types like Bill Gates, and those advocating a post-capitalist utopia, and, the authors are right in emphasizing that the future class struggle will be decided with regard to the possible coalition between the post-capitalist netocrats and the underprivileged consumptariat. Without this coalition and support from within netocracy, the consumptariat alone can only articulate its protest in violent negative actions lacking any positive, future-oriented program. The key point is thus that there is no neutral netocracy, there is either a pro-capitalist netocracy, itself part of late capitalism, or the post-capitalist netocracy, part of a different mode of production. To complicate things further, this post-capitalist perspective is, in itself, ambiguous. It can mean a more open democratic system or the emergence of a new hierarchy, a kind of informational/biogenetic neo-feudalism. This struggle is already taking place. In 2001, the Microsoft Corporation announced that it is working on Palladium, a radically new version of Windows with a separate security chip that would give users protection and control of their information. Nothing leaves your PC without your permission. Palladium ensures, through encryption, that no one eavesdrops on you, all ingoing mail is filtered, your outgoing messages can be opened only by those you authorize, you can track who opened them, and so forth. It is a plan to remake the personal computer to ensure security, privacy, and intellectual property. Is this not the big attempt to inscribe the informational universe into the capitalist logic of private property? Opposed to this tendency are attempts to develop a new cyberspace language, an alternative to Windows, that would be not only freely accessible to everyone but also developed through free social interaction. Preliminary versions are not kept hidden, awaiting the magic moment when the new product is revealed to the market. On the contrary, these versions already freely circulate in order to elicit feedback from the users. The fact that AOL supports such an alternative in order to strike at its competitor is telltale. Why should progressive forces not strategically use this support?